this one is, this panel has a lot of roots in MIT, first of all. That's what's going to more happen in this room. And this one is also about technologies you might not have been aware of or things you hadn't thought of, at least when I talk to people. Maybe you guys are all over it already. But let's hear what is the really surprising, cool thing you're doing here. James, you want to start? You're the first on the list.
Sure. Yeah, so, okay, hi everyone. I'm James Boyd. I'm the launch director of the Wolfram Institute, which is a new nonprofit institute that I'm building with Stephen Wolfram. And one of the things that we're working on is we're working on new institutions for Web3, including especially those pertaining to education. So we have plans for new forms of tokenization economies that should be replacing the grant funding process for science, something that we're calling metaversities, or new kinds of universities that'll be peer-to-peer apprenticeship organizations between students and professionals that can help to disintermediate universities to a large extent, especially the administrative overhang that they have. And finally, we want to make it possible for scientists to be able to monetize their works much more readily. I think it's kind of a colossal forfeiture of value that most scientists submit their papers and their articles to journals, either for no money or they even pay for them. So we want to make it possible for scientists to begin to actually monetize their work and make money, either as individuals or even as guilds. And so we'll be designing what we call neo-guilds, which will be these new kind of DAO-like organizations for scientists to be able to sustain themselves. This is how we intend to sustain ourselves as an institute, and we hope to share these new inventions with others so that science can be more self-sustaining and create more value for the scientific community and for the world through Web3.
That's great. And I should point out that this is in conjunction with Wolfram, who did sort of Web3 physics back in the day. It's one of the more amazing examples of physics and Mathematica, right? And so, you know, they do stuff that works. This is not just a dream. Pay attention, okay?
Yeah, that's right, Sandy.
Yeah, good. Jeremy, you also do things that really work, but things that a lot of people aren't thinking about, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this entire world we're talking about is obviously predicated on the Web 1 and Web 2 world, which is essentially the internet, all these networks. And we're all aware that there's a lot of amazingly good things going on, but there's a lot of bad things going on. And so I think one of the great possibilities of the future with Web3 technology is the ability to protect this domain while also having the absolute highest regard for people's privacy. And that may sound like a completely contradictory thing, but I think it's actually something we can technically do now.
So one of the things that Jeremy does is he runs one of the biggest supercomputer centers in the world and is able to actually monitor and analyze the entire dark web in real time. And what he's busy doing now is getting all of those pipes, those telcos and people, to begin to actually install the sort of hardware that he's helping to develop to be able to make our world a lot safer place for all these things. Good, so come back to that. Beth.
Thanks, Sandy. So what we're working on, I run an education technology company, and as many of you may know, education is one of the slower moving sort of operations in this whole digital domain. So what we're working on is twofold. We're really interested in helping educate people about Web3. It's much misunderstood, mischaracterized. Just literally walk down the street, ask anybody what Web3 is, and they'll be like, I don't know, no idea. Don't even know what there's really so little understanding of it. But on top of that, we're also building a metaverse product to educate adults in a game-based immersive environment. So it's sort of metaverse in the metaverse, learning about it, being in it, introducing tokens as a way to credentialize the experience, creating an avatar, both permanent worlds and then worlds that you can manipulate and send people through to experience challenges, learn about leadership development, learn about how to be a flexible sort of member of a work community or a learning community, and sort of blend all these things together so that it can feel like you're learning the thing that you then need to do. And that's what we're working on.
Can you say who you're working with?
Yes. We are working with Microsoft and using Minecraft as the substrate for this learning experience. I'm sure that if I asked everybody in this room if you know what Minecraft is, if you've ever used Minecraft, or if your children have ever used Minecraft, everybody in this room will have their hands up. Yeah.
So you can imagine learning to work with other people in Minecraft. I could have done really good things for my 10-year-old, right? Instead of batting them around the ears and saying, don't do that.
And if I may, if you watch kids interact in game-based environments, particularly collaborative game-based environments, how they interact, what they say to each other, the ways of relationship building and sense-making is so sophisticated, and yet they're using sort of proto-language that you can't quite unpack. So you've got to really listen and watch, but you see the development of all those skills if you watch kids learn that way. It's really interesting.
Super, good. Guy.
Hey, I'm Guy Zyskind, founder of SCRT. SCRT is actually has its roots here with research work I did with Sandy as a grad student quite a few years ago. But today, SCRT is a Layer 1 blockchain. It's actually one of the biggest Cosmos Layer 1 blockchains in existence. You know, we have hundreds of projects building on us, a lot of companies building on us, several hundreds of thousands of users and who interact with the chain. You know, the chain has about 15 to 20,000 transactions a day and is moving billions of dollars in value every month or so. So it's a big beast, but what's really unique about it, and that's the one thing that we do that others don't, is that all smart contracts in SCRT are completely private. That means that anything that users interact with, whenever they send data into the chain, whenever that data is being computed on chain, and whenever the chain gives back results, all of it is encrypted end to end. So another way to look at it is basically the world's largest open private compute network.
That's pretty amazing. So this is this theme I was talking about earlier, is that the sort of headline advertising for Web3 is, oh, you get to own your own data, it's all private. But actually not. You have to do different techniques to break it. So these are the sort of things that you're making it more difficult to do, and Jeremy's actually finding them. And then you get this whole sort of thing about, oh, well, we're all going to have on Oculus Rifts and run around. But that's probably not, hopefully not going to happen. And so we hear that they're actually things that you can relate to, your kids can do that are very positive with these sorts of things, and I think that's pretty amazing too. You want to finish up the
Yes.
entries here?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Sandy. So we got a lot of great organizations here, and we're kind of building these things, and we're looking in the future, and we're thinking 25, 30 years from now, we know these are going to be big. We don't know exactly how, but they're going to be out there. But in the meantime, we got a lot of problems actually finding the talent to be able to fill those roles. Not just at the top of the organizations where you have these brilliant people actually building, but also just doing the things like building out the websites, building the analytics, helping run the organizations. And we're kind of in this talent crunch area where we are paying a lot for talent and we cannot have them working on all these issues. So me and my co-founder, is one of the longest running, boot camp directors in the country for, full stack development, kind of looked at this and said, there's a lot of people who don't know about this space who could be making a big impact if they just knew a little bit more about it. So that's kind of why we started DevMint, basically. We're looking to find, mid to senior level talent that's not looking at Web3 today, that's not part of the talent pool, and then helping train them on the Solidity stack today, but it could be more in the future, and really place them with the organization so that they can go start solving these problems. Not only, getting new people into the space, but also taking off a lot of that load from the, senior folks so they can focus on the biggest problems, and that's what I'm doing.
That's really super, because this really is a key problem, particularly with labor shortage and work from home and all those sorts of things going on. There are a lot of people who just don't know that they could be doing something a lot more interesting.
Oh yeah,
And remunerative, probably.
It's incredible. And I know people I've known for 6 years, and this has been my life, who I said, hey, what's Web3? And again, like Beth said, they have no clue. They just
Right.
don't know what it is. They don't know what this does.
So let me start with you, though. So what do you think Web3 and the metaverse is? What can we tell all those people without using buzz phrases and blah, blah, blah?
Well, I guess I was talking with a person in Austin a couple weeks ago at Consensus, where I like her term. It's like Web3 is a vibe, really, because you really can't define the nodes to it. As a developer, I kind of go down to is like, okay, what's the core difference here? What is a Web3 app, right? And at the core of it, you really are using these L1 and L2 platforms to really go and provide value. Everything you're building on top of that really streams from that, talking specifically about Web3. So that starts to encompass like the actual Web3 companies or the blockchain companies, but you also start get to more like these gaming companies that are like, well, they're not building smart contracts, they're utilizing other things, but if you look deep, dive down to what core value are they building on, they're building on Ethereum, Solana, Bitcoin, whatever these networks are. So for that's about as comfortable as I am saying what Web3 is and what it offshoots there. Other than that, we're still defining it. It's still being figured out. Not unlike big data back in, a decade ago.
Yeah, James, we'll just go down the line here. What do you think? How are you going to tell people what this is and where it's going?
Well, what I'm most interested in is Web3 as an economy, okay, as a future economy. And I mean, there are different facets to it at the moment, right? So we have DeFi, we have the metaverse. I mean, let me say something. What's interesting about DeFi is that it allows for the kind of diffusive expansion of more personalized monetary authority, okay? But that authority right now is quite contested and it's quite competitive. So you have these different cryptocurrencies, but they're competing against each other, they're competing against fiat, and they're really competing against anything that's in an investment portfolio. And one of the results right now is that the value is quite volatile. But I think that there is serious promise for personalized value creation in the Web3 economy. So right now, you have the infrastructure, you have the personalization of this monetary authority, but in parallel, you have to have personalized value creation. And I think the metaverse, NFTs, and more Web3 technologies can make that happen. I mean, look, with the metaverse, you can turn anything into capital, basically, and the barriers between ideas, pure ideas, and computational forms that are marketized, that barrier is greatly reduced because of the digital medium. And with NFTs, you have the ability to introduce something into the market with some sort of unique presence so that its manifestation digitally is also itself real value creation. But what I'm really interested in the future is something like an idea economy where individuals and their ideas that they, because of their natural human tendencies tend to produce, those ideas can be readily marketized and people can get paid, to do the things that they really love. For me, it's science, but for other people, it's all kinds of things. Eventually, that should be the economy that Web3.
So that's a great vision, but isn't it largely constrained to like the people in this room, people that are educated, know how to use tools, have the sort of basic thought processes of marketing and software creation or organization creation? How does this help people, in the Amazon or wherever? I mean, how does this involve large fractions of people?
Well, it's not going to help anyone in the Amazon in the short-term future, I don't think.
No, but I mean the long-term version. I mean, because that's what's really interesting.
I think in the long-term future, what I'd like to see is with increased automation and also with the economy becoming more computational, okay, and with further platforms that allow for basically the liquidity of ideas, that people who do things that other people find are interesting are able to find the people who are interested in them and to be able to make money from that. I'm sure there are many people in the world that love to learn all kinds of things about the Amazon, for instance. They don't have access to them right now, and whatever that knowledge is, I mean, look, I'm sure there are people who would pay, for instance, for, we could call autochthonous knowledge that's held by people in the Amazon. But that idea market is not liquid right now. There's really not a good way of being able to exchange knowledge in that way, but it could be.
So the way I think about this, because we do a lot of stuff internationals, in Brazil, there's something like 300,000 people that, women mostly, that sell makeup and home health products for Natura. They would love to have something where they can find more clients, they can deliver things, stuff like that. they have the same problems that all small businesses have, which is you have your private data, and you have to be able to do transactions. Are you looking for that sort of thing where all of these very sort of single proprietary entrepreneur types can more easily make a living?
Well, look, let me stay within my scope, right? So I think I'm interested in the Institute of Science because I think it's one of the most important institutes that humankind has.
Good point. Okay.
So I want to build the tools that can be used first for building this particular institute and marketizing these particular ideas. That's the scope that this begins with, at least for me. But this should spread to other people. Everyone has ideas. Ideas have value. But the actual liquid market value for ideas, I think right now is still quite low. It can grow, and other people who are interested in particular ideas, within their own relative scope should be able to contribute to this as a long term.
I have to vote for that because as someone who lives in a university, I can tell you is a lot more screwed up than it even looks, right? So,
Yeah.
Okay, enough said. Beth.
Sure. I think that the way I'd like to define it is anything that's governed by a set of technologies that allows for decentralized governance. And that can be a lot of different things. What we were just talking about is sort of like unveiling value in ideas that come from disparate sources that aren't necessarily locked up inside of corporations or held onto by patents or whatever that idea space might be. But I mean even more generally, and part of what we work on is sort of collaborative decision making and being able to feel like you can actually move forward with something in a governance structure that values decentralization. And so much of how we operate inside of corporations, so much of how we operate inside of universities, right, is very hierarchical and is very much not about decentralized idea generation and idea value capture. And that is what we're really, sort of focused on and what I think of when I think of Web 3.0. And there's all kinds of ways in which you could do that, literally, but that's sort of the superstructure I think about.
So this is about flattening organizations, but keeping them trustworthy
Exactly.
and accountable.
Yes.
Because that's what goes away a lot of times.
Accountability,
when you flatten.
autonomy, all of these A words that we like to use around how to help empower smaller and smaller groups of people to be able to actually have their own little mini economies, mini idea factories, mini whatever those are. We really just don't do that today.
So I like that because, a lot of the objections people have to society today around capitalism, around this, around that, really are objections to hierarchy.
Yes.
And if you can have something where everybody has access and also the dynamics don't tend towards monopoly,
Right.
right?
Right.
And you may be able to cure a lot of those things.
Yeah, and part of it is attitudinal. I just want to emphasize that. This is also about helping people understand that they actually can tap into some kind of a structure where they are not being told you will fall into line, you will be part of a hierarchy, and everything that you do is governed by that hierarchy. That is also a mindset shift change.
So I like the comment that I hear from a lot of people. It's like, why do we have jobs? Who wants a job? A job is like sort of a stupid thing. You want to do stuff that's interesting. You want to feed your kids. You want to have fun. Nobody actually wants a job. Why do we have those? And I think it comes from the 1800s when you had these big factories where everybody had to pull the lever.
That's right.
So, Guy.
Web3, well, yeah, I agree we're still figuring it out, but when it comes to me, I still think of Web3 as the decentralized web. And what that means is that, we're reducing the barriers and we are removing the intermediaries and gatekeepers. And why is that interesting? I mean, I think DeFi and NFTs I don't think DeFi and NFTs are like the end game of Web3, but I think they bring really good examples of why this is useful. So today you have like 20 years old, extremely talented, extremely smart, building the kinds of like financial products that the TradeFi, classical, traditional finance industry would not do in a million years just because of it's people with no baggage, with no old conceptions. It's like open research. They can all collaborate and compose what they do with each other. And that is really only possible with the web where there are less intermediaries and less gatekeepers. Same goes with NFTs, right? NFTs bring the creators, the artists, closer, you know, to their crowd, to the people who like their work. They reduce the dependency on intermediaries, on agents, and so forth. You know, we're doing a project right now with Kevin Smith, who's like a very well-known filmmaker, and we are releasing like the first movie on the blockchain. So it's not going to go on cinema. It's not going to go on Netflix. It's going to go on the blockchain. And if you buy that NFT, you get access to the movie, but you also get IP rights directly. And to work with Kevin Smith on like future versions and future IP. And those are things that, in my opinion, kind of like take the essence of what Web3 really opens that Web 2 and Web 1 didn't.
But so that's this sort of like making things more liquid, making transaction costs lower, making the access better. But actually what you've built is something to allow people to better control their data.
That's correct, yeah.
And so that seems like that must be at the really heart of all of this.
I mean, I think it's a part of it. I think without that, like, I still think, look, I've been in this for like a decade, but I still think Web3 wouldn't work without privacy. I think there are three pillars. There's scalability. Everyone's looking at scalability. It's a huge problem. We'll solve that. There are trade-offs there that people have to recognize. Then there's privacy. That's what we're tackling. Without it, I don't think this is very useful. And then there's, you know, user experience, which is really crappy right now.
Yes.
Yes, right, yeah. Jeremy.
So I'd say this is a relatively easy question for me as a person who's been a veteran of Web 1, 2, and 3. And I would say that for those of you who don't know, the internet was originally designed and built to connect supercomputing centers in the United States. You go look that up, that's actually what it did. And as a person who was there and adjacent to much of that, the tools we built on it had absolutely no regard for protection or privacy. We, in fact, took active measures to remove the things that were going to do that because the systems we were building on did have them, but we had to turn them off to enable Web 1, which included things like Telnet and FTP and Gopher, which, by the way, was kicking Web's butt. Web was dying until a little browser came along called NCSA Mosaic, which stands for National Center for Supercomputing Applications. That was the first web, and then it took off from there. Web 2 built on that, created this whole economy, but again, it was built on a foundation with no regard for protection or privacy. And for me, Web 3 is just simply the correction. We are now going to go back and put in a regard for protection and privacy and fix this and allow us to unleash so much more because we all recognize that that is a gap in the Web 1 and Web 2 technology. So for me, it's sort of a rather reductionist view of what Web 3 is. It's a fix of a problem.
So that's the story about Web 3, but we've also seen that you can do a variety of attacks on Web 3, which are perhaps just as bad as you can do in Web 1 and Web 2. They're different characters of things, but Palo Alto Networks isn't going to help you, right?
Absolutely. I would say the current Web3 technologies are sort of very nascent. To me, the bigger thing is the concept that we want privacy and protection. The technologies we have now are a starting point, but we're going to have to build newer and better ones to really achieve this vision for Web3, which is a full regard of protection and privacy into what we want these internet to be.
Right. And so that's, for instance, one of the main things we try to do here at MIT is say, don't believe all the stuff about security and privacy. We've got to do another whole generation, not a whole generation, small generation of work on top of this to make it really work that way, right? So we're running out of time here. We need to wrap up, and then we need to get the next panel up here. Why don't we go do sort of a round of what do you think are the biggest problems that the audience ought to think about working on and where we're going? Just it's a very sort of open question, but
right.
The future, yeah.
Right, I think that it goes back to user experience right now, and I think the core of that is the wallet experience we have today. We built wallets today to be really these general purpose connect them to the blockchain, and do whatever. And when this was starting out a few years ago, we didn't know what the use cases would be. But today we're now starting to realize, okay, we have things like traders, collectors, we have people who are storing long-term, we have developers who need to see a lot of different detail, and we're all filtering through this one single interface that isn't really serving anyone. If there's one thing I want to see happen in the next 5 years, it's that wallets start to split off and start to specialize into different areas that, talking about the Amazonians, where they're not going to need the same thing, see the same thing as me. So what can we strip away, and then what can we go deeper into? We need a lot of user experience research into that.
So this is like when the when web browsers became part of the first web, suddenly it took off, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Sir.
We need to create institutions for Web3. And when I say institutions, I don't mean like regulatory institutions. What I mean is organizations that are committed to certain values and operate in a way that allows to create that value. Okay, the infrastructure for Web3 is being created, quite a bit of financial infrastructure, Web3 infrastructure. So again, that infrastructure, it produces a certain amount of value, but it's not nearly enough. And I think the volatility that we see right now, especially in DeFi, reflects the fact that there's a certain crisis of value still, okay? Because you have the financial infrastructure, but that is not, there's more to life than financial infrastructure. There's all kinds of value that needs to be created. But the thing is, Web3, the institutions that are in Web3, they need to be compelling, right? So a compelling institution has to have, a compelling mission to create values. To create value by, holding certain values with conviction and actually making them happen. And I think ultimately that's going to require looking at institutions that exist outside of Web3, understanding their limitations, and breaking rules within Web3 to create value that you can't get elsewhere. That's what will make Web3 institutions compelling. That's what we're going to do with science, and that's what people who care about other things should also be doing. Make institutions that protect and, impress your values into Web3. Those values, if they're made, with interaction with the financial infrastructure, could become monetary value, and then people will want to join because you have something compelling that you don't have outside of Web3.
So let me just add to that. So there's a quote from President Xi of China about data being the new primary means of production. Remember, this is a lead Marxist saying this. Primary means of production like capital and labor. We have all these institutions, labor unions, rules for how labor can interact. We have all sorts of rules about how capital can interact. We don't have anything about data, and we don't have anything about these sort of digital interactions. And maybe those are some of the institutions that are most urgently needed. And you're doing this for sort of the science infrastructure. How do you set up groups of educational scientists, et cetera, people to be able to own their data, capitalize on it, interact better? Is that fair?
Yes, but it will touch other people's lives too, because most people go to universities, and we should have new versions of those in Web3. Most people get a university education. I think we can really obsolesce universities and create something that's much more compelling.
Be careful about that. Most people go to some sort of school. Only a minority goes to university. But okay, at any rate, even in this country, yeah.
I'm going to pick up on something you were just saying. I think privacy is key. I don't think people actually understand what privacy really means in its full realization of the idea of privacy. So many people interact with institutions, with governments, with companies in this completely sort of, I gave up on my data a long time ago way. And I think privacy education, somebody used to say to me, oh, you really care about digital literacy. No, I stopped caring about digital literacy a long time ago. I actually now really care about privacy literacy. I don't think people really understand it. I interact with students all the time, and I'm shocked at how little people understand. And it's sort of my mission now.
Cool. Guy.
I mean, I would repeat that it would be funny if I don't say Web3 data privacy, but
Had a privacy hat on. Yeah, okay. Well,
yeah.
we know your story. Okay. Jeremy, final word, and then we should go to the next.
So I think, creating interactions between technologists, lawyers, policy people, perhaps a mistake we did in Web 1 and 2 was technology for technology's sake. And really, we need to have a much broader set of people as part of the conversation now than we ever had before. And so, that would be where I would leave it, is we need to have a more diverse group of people at the table as we develop these ideas.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you all. We're out of time. Hopefully, I thought this was really interesting because of you. And let's go on to the next one. So folks, talk to them. You hear about like some really interesting stuff.
So, Beth, we do a lot with online education.
Do some social networking in IRL, right?